I opened my eyes to a shadow hovering over me. The world was white and sharp. Something was beeping in my ears, and my chest felt heavy, as if a stone had been placed on it. A police officer stood over my bed. His uniform rustled slightly as he leaned closer. "Miss Rivers," he said evenly, without a trace of emotion. "Your family has reported that you are a danger to yourself." I blinked. I thought it had to be a hallucination. That I wasn't fully awake yet. But then I saw them. My mother was standing in the doorway. She wasn't crying. She didn't look worried. She simply nodded, briefly, deliberately, as if confirming that what he said was correct. My husband stood beside her. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the floor. My hands began to shake so badly that the sheets rustled softly beneath me. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, as if it had been filled with sand. This is a mistake," I whispered. The officer didn't answer. He just wrote something down. And in that moment, the most terrifying truth settled in. This wasn't a mistake. They had done this on purpose. The people I trusted with my life had decided that I was the danger. If stories like this matter to you, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and tell me where you're watching from. Because what happened next changed my life forever. That morning looked so ordinary that it almost feels cruel to remember it now. Austin was already warm when I stepped outside, the air thick with the smell of sun-heated pavement and roasted coffee drifting from somewhere down the street. I paused for a second by the door, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder, thinking, absurdly, that I should start leaving 5 minutes earlier in the mornings. I was always planning small improvements to a life I believed was stable. I poured coffee into my travel mug. The lid squeaked, the same irritating sound it had made for months. I frowned at it, twisted it tighter, then let it be. I had a habit of letting small discomforts pass. They never felt urgent enough. The elevator groaned as it descended, stalling briefly between floors like it always did. A man from the 7th floor stood beside me, scrolling through his phone. He joked about Mondays, about how the week had already betrayed us. I smiled automatically, the way you smile when politeness has replaced emotion. Nothing felt wrong yet. At the office, the day unfolded exactly as expected. The soft hum of computers. The clatter of keyboards. Muted conversations drifting over cubicle walls. I sat at my desk, straightened my chair, and opened my reports. Numbers calmed me. Order always had. I liked knowing where things belonged. Late in the morning, my phone vibrated. "Nathan. Don't forget your bracelet." I'm worried, red heart. I remember the warmth that spread through me when I read it. I actually smiled, softly, to myself. I thought, how lucky I am. A husband who paid attention. A husband who worried. A man who cared enough to remind me. I looked down at my wrist. The bracelet rested there, snug but not tight, cool against my skin. I had worn it so long that it barely registered anymore. Like my wedding ring. Like my own pulse. It had become part of the background of my body. Already wearing it, I typed back, adding a heart without thinking. At lunch, I pushed food around my plate more than I ate. I told myself it was stress. Deadlines. Another meeting added to the calendar. My hands shook slightly when I lifted my fork, but I ignored that too. I had learned to dismiss my body when it spoke quietly. Sometime after noon, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. A faint dizziness, like standing up too fast. The room tilted, then settled. I took a deep breath and kept working. Then my heart began to race. Not panic. Not fear. Something heavier. Irregular. As if it couldn't decide what rhythm it belonged to. My fingers tingled. The screen blurred. I stood up from my chair, intending to walk to the restroom, to splash water on my face, to sit for a minute. The floor moved. Or maybe I did. A coworker said my name. Someone pushed back a chair. Papers slid off a desk. I remember thinking, very calmly, this is inconvenient. The last clear words I heard were someone saying, call an ambulance, and the police. The police. That part didn't make sense to me. Then everything went black. When I came back to myself, the first thing I felt was pressure. Not sharp pain. Not fire. Just pressure, deep, steady, unforgiving, like someone had placed a heavy hand flat against my chest and was slowly leaning their full weight into it. Breathing felt possible, but only barely. Each breath came with effort, as if my body had to be reminded how. There was a sound nearby. A steady beep. Measured. Mechanical. Indifferent. It was keeping track of something inside me that I could no longer feel. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was white, too white. Not the warm white of a bedroom, but the sterile kind that belongs to places where people lose their names and become charts. The light hurt. My vision swam, then slowly steadied. A hospital. Thin wires ran from my chest, tugging slightly when I shifted. They disappeared beneath a paper gown that smelled of detergent and antiseptic. My mouth was dry, my throat raw, as if I had been crying or screaming without remembering it. I swallowed. It hurt. I turned my head to the side. That was when I saw Nathan. He wasn't sitting by my bed. He was standing near the window, half turned away from me, his shoulders tense. He held his phone in both hands, thumbs moving quickly, typing, pausing, typing again. His face was serious. Focused. Not afraid. He didn't notice that my eyes were open. That detail settled heavily inside me. I watched him for a moment, disoriented, trying to understand why it bothered me so much. He should have been here. Right beside me. Watching my face. Waiting for me to wake up. Instead, he was communicating with someone else. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Nathan, I whispered. The word barely made it past my lips. My voice sounded unfamiliar, thin and hoarse, like it belonged to someone else. But he heard it. He turned immediately, sliding his phone into his pocket with a smooth, practiced motion. Too smooth. You're awake, he said, stepping closer. Thank God. Relief entered his voice, but a fraction of a second too late. He took my hand. His grip was firm. Grounding. Almost controlling. You scared everyone, he said softly. You collapsed at work. My chest tightened again, and this time it wasn't my heart. What happened? I asked. You had an episode, he replied. Your heart rate was unstable. They had to sedate you. An episode. The word was vague enough to explain anything and nothing at the same time. Before I could ask more, a nurse entered the room. She checked the monitor, asked me to squeeze her fingers, shined a light into my eyes. Her movements were efficient, detached. You're responsive, she said, mostly to herself. Then she left. The door closed. Silence returned. That was when memory snapped into place. The bracelet. The thought came so suddenly it made my stomach twist. I looked down at my wrist. It was still there. The thin band rested against my skin, cool and quiet, exactly where it always was. I had worn it so long it felt like part of me, like my wedding ring, like my pulse. I barely remembered what it felt like not to have it on. At that exact moment, the door opened again. A doctor stepped inside. Older. Calm. The kind of man who didn't waste words or raise his voice. He looked at the monitor first, then followed the wires to my body. His eyes stopped at my wrist. Take that bracelet off, he said. Nathan stiffened instantly. It's medical, he said quickly. She's supposed to wear it. The doctor didn't look at him. Take it off, he repeated. Now. My fingers trembled as I reached for the clasp. They felt clumsy, uncooperative, like they belonged to someone else. The metal resisted for a moment, then gave way. When the bracelet slid free, my skin underneath felt strangely warm, almost burning. Minutes passed. Something changed. The pressure in my chest eased. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. The tightness loosened. The beeping slowed. I took a deeper breath than I had since waking up. Then another. The doctor watched the monitor carefully. "That's interesting," he murmured, writing something down. Nathan said nothing. But his hand tightened around mine. And for the first time since I opened my eyes, real fear arrived. Not sudden. Not chaotic. Quiet. Focused. Certain. Because something wasn't just wrong with my body. Something was wrong with the people standing beside it. When the doctor left, the room felt smaller. The air seemed heavier, as if it had settled lower, closer to my chest. The monitor continued its steady beeping, slower now, more controlled, but I couldn't stop listening to it. Each sound felt like a reminder that something inside me had nearly failed, and that other people had been watching it happen. Nathan sat back down in the chair beside the bed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. From the outside, it probably looked like worry. Like devotion. Like a man exhausted by fear for his wife. But lying there, unable to move much, I noticed details I had ignored for years. The way he didn't quite look at me. The way his jaw stayed tense, as if he were holding something back. The way his phone rested face down on his thigh, never leaving his reach, as if it were more important than my breathing. "I'm going to get some water," he said after a moment. "You should rest." He stood before I could answer. The door closed softly behind him, careful, considerate, almost polite. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It wasn't shared anymore. I stared at the ceiling again, at the faint crack running diagonally across one of the tiles. I wondered how many people had stared at that same crack while their lives quietly rearranged themselves without asking permission. My chest still felt sore, but clearer. My head, too. And that was when fear stopped being chaos and began to take shape. Not panic. Not hysteria. Recognition. I turned my head slightly and looked at the bedside table. The bracelet lay there, inert now, a thin loop of metal and plastic that looked harmless when it wasn't touching me. How long had I worn it? I tried to remember the first day it became normal. The first day I stopped questioning it. The first day it stopped feeling like something temporary. Nathan had always reminded me. "You forgot it again. Promise me you'll wear it today. I can't relax if you don't have it on." He always said it gently. With concern. With love. "I just want you safe," he used to say. The words echoed differently now, stripped of their softness. A memory surfaced, slow and vivid. 2 years earlier, sitting in a cardiologist's office that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. The paper on the exam table sticking to the back of my thighs. The doctor speaking calmly, carefully, as if choosing words that wouldn't frighten me. A minor issue. Manageable. Something to monitor, not fear. Nathan had been there, his hand resting on my knee. He asked all the questions before I could. Took notes. Nodded seriously, as if the situation were far more dangerous than it sounded. Afterward, he insisted we go out for lunch. He talked about diet changes, about rest, about being careful. I remember thinking how attentive he was. How lucky I was not to be alone. That was the beginning, though I didn't know it then. Fear, I would later understand, never arrives announcing itself. It arrives dressed as care. Over the months that followed, concerns slowly turned into questions. Questions turned into suggestions. Suggestions into rules that didn't sound like rules at all. Maybe you shouldn't work so late. Your friends don't really understand your condition. You push yourself too hard. And always, always. I know what's best for you. The bracelet came later. He framed it as a solution. As peace of mind. As something responsible couples did. I remembered the first time he fastened it around my wrist. His fingers lingered longer than necessary. I laughed, trying to make it lighter, to keep it from feeling so final. You make it sound so serious, I had said. He hadn't laughed back. Now, alone in the hospital bed, I felt something cold settle deep in my stomach. It wasn't the fear of dying. It was the fear of having lived without seeing clearly. The door opened again. Nathan returned with a paper cup of water. He held it up carefully, watching as I took small, measured sips, as if I might spill or choke without supervision. You're doing better, he said. The doctor said so. I nodded. But I was no longer listening the way I used to. For the first time, I was listening to the spaces between words. To what wasn't being said. To what had been said too often. And beneath the steady, obedient beeping of the monitor, a quiet thought formed, calm, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. This didn't start today. This had been growing slowly, patiently. For a very long time. Nathan had entered my life 2 years earlier, quietly. Not with fireworks. Not with drama. Just steadiness. Reliability. A sense of calm I didn't know how much I needed until it was there. He was charming in a restrained way. Successful, but not showy. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who remembered details and followed through. When he said he would call, he did. When he offered help, it came without strings, at least, that's how it seemed. I just want you to be safe, he said early on. At first, it sounded romantic. After years of being independent, of carrying everything myself, it felt like relief. Like I could finally rest my guard for a moment. The concern came gently. Questions slipped into conversations like they belonged there. Did you get home okay? Why are you still working this late? Do you really trust those people? I answered without thinking. Explained myself. Reassured him. He nodded. Always nodded. Then concern became guidance. Maybe you don't need to see them so often. They stress you out. You look exhausted lately. I told myself he was observant. Attentive. Loving. Then guidance became correction. Why would you push yourself like that? You know that's not good for your heart. Let me handle this. You shouldn't worry. The words were always wrapped in care. Always delivered softly. Always followed by a touch to my arm, my back, my wrist. Always my wrist. The bracelet appeared after the cardiologist appointment. It was framed as a solution. As something modern. Responsible. This will monitor you, he said. Give us peace of mind. Us. I hesitated for a moment. I remember that clearly. Just a moment. He noticed. You don't trust me, he asked quietly. The question landed like a rebuke. I laughed it off. Let him fasten it. Told myself it was temporary. From that day on, the reminders began. You forgot it. Promise me you'll wear it. I can't relax if you don't. If I resisted, even lightly, his tone changed, not angry, but wounded. I'm just trying to keep you alive. So I complied. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, my world shrank. Friends faded away, not dramatically, just through cancelled plans and gentle discouragement. You looked tired last time. They don't really understand your condition. You were anxious afterward, remember? Work became a concern. Do you really need this stress? What if something happens while you're there? I worry when I can't reach you. My confidence eroded quietly, like stone worn smooth by water. He never raised his voice. Never demanded. He simply positioned himself as the only safe place left. By the time I noticed the pattern, it felt too late to name it. In the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed moments I had dismissed. The way he spoke for me in appointments. The way doctors began looking at him instead of me. The way my opinions softened, then disappeared. He had always been there. Always helping. And now, sitting beside my bed, watching me breathe, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Nathan didn't need to hurt me. He only needed others to believe I was fragile. The change after I removed the bracelet was undeniable. It wasn't dramatic, not immediate relief, but a gradual easing, like a knot loosening somewhere deep inside my chest. The pressure softened. The air began to move more freely in my lungs. Even the light in the room seemed less aggressive, as if my body had stopped fighting it. The monitor's beeping slowed, settling into a calmer, steadier rhythm. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how something so small, so ordinary, could have made me feel like I was quietly suffocating. Nathan noticed the change immediately. Of course he did. He leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen, watching the numbers the way a man watches a storm that refuses to obey him. His hand rested on my forearm, fingers spread, not comforting, not gentle. Claiming. "That's good," he said softly. "See? You're stabilizing." But the doctor's expression didn't match Nathan's calm reassurance. He studied the monitor again, then glanced at the bracelet lying on the bedside table. The way he looked at it made my stomach tighten. Not curiosity, assessment. "Have you experienced similar episodes recently?" he asked me. Nathan answered before I could open my mouth. "She's been struggling," he said smoothly. "Dizzy spells. Anxiety. Confusion sometimes." Confusion. The word echoed unpleasantly in my ears. I turned my head slightly and looked at him. He still wasn't looking at me. "That's not," I began, but the doctor lifted a hand. "I'm asking her," he said calmly. The room went quiet in a way that felt new. Not tense, decisive. As if something had finally been interrupted. I swallowed. "I've felt off," I said carefully. "Tired. Lightheaded. But it always passed." "And the bracelet," the doctor continued, "who prescribed it?" Nathan shifted in his seat. "It's a medical device. For monitoring. Peace of mind." The doctor wrote something down. Slowly. Deliberately. "Did your cardiologist recommend it?" he asked. There was a pause. Nathan smiled, small and controlled. "We researched options. Given her condition, it seemed responsible." The doctor turned to me. "Did you agree to this?" The question caught me off guard. Because the truth was complicated. I had agreed the way you agree to avoid arguments. The way you agree when disagreement leads to wounded silence, tension that fills the house, and the quiet accusation that you don't appreciate love. "Yes," I said. The doctor didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He simply nodded and wrote something else down. "I want cardiology to review your recent readings," he said. "And I'm ordering toxicology." Routine. Nathan straightened. "Toxicology? Why would?" "Routine," the doctor repeated, already turning toward the door. When he left, Nathan exhaled slowly, as if releasing air he'd been holding for too long. "You see," he said, leaning closer. "They're concerned. You scared people today." "I scared people," I repeated quietly. He squeezed my arm. "You don't remember everything. That's normal after sedation." That was the first time he tried to lay his version of the day over mine, like a blanket meant to smother questions. A nurse entered with a clipboard. She checked my adjusted the monitor, and smiled professionally. Then her eyes landed on the bracelet. Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. "You're feeling better now?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Much better." She nodded, but her gaze stayed on my face longer than necessary, as if she were looking past my words. "Is there someone else you'd like us to notify?" she asked gently. I frowned. "Someone else?" She glanced briefly at Nathan. He sat up straighter. "It's a standard question," she said quickly. "Sometimes patients prefer another family member or friend present." "I have my husband," I said. Her smile tightened, not unkind, but cautious. "Of course." She left. A few minutes later, a woman in a beige cardigan appeared in the doorway. No stethoscope. No rush. She carried a folder and introduced herself as Hospital Social Services. "I'm just going to ask you a few questions," she said, pulling a chair closer. "This is routine." Nathan stood immediately. "I'll stay." She looked at him evenly. "I need to speak with her alone." "She gets anxious without me," he said quickly. Her tone sharpened, just slightly. "Hospital policy requires privacy." For a moment, I thought he would push back. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled. "I'll be right outside," he said. When the door closed behind him, the room felt like it could finally breathe. The woman opened her folder. "Miss Rivers," she said, "your workplace contacted the hospital before you arrived." My stomach clenched. "My workplace?" "Yes." "They were told to expect a mental health crisis." I shook my head. I didn't." "I'm not making assumptions," she said calmly. "I'm telling you what was reported." My mouth went dry. "Who told them that?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "And," she continued, "there was a request for law enforcement to be present, in case you became a danger to yourself." Those exact words. My hands began to shake, not with weakness, but with something sharp and electric. "Nathan," I whispered. She watched my face carefully. "Do you feel safe at home?" she asked. The question landed like a blade. Before I could answer, she slid a document slightly toward me. "I also need you to know," she said, "that your husband asked about competency procedures. Power of attorney. Medical decision authority." The words blurred together. Competency. Authority. Decision. I thought of the bracelet. The doctor's silence. The police officer's voice. My voice came out thin. "He's preparing papers to declare me incompetent?" She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply met my eyes and said, "You deserve to know what's being discussed around you." Outside the door, I heard Nathan laughing softly with someone in the hallway. Calm. Controlled. And in that moment, everything became clear. This hadn't been an accident. It had been planned. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood, paper, and recycled air. It was a restrained smell, controlled, like everything else in that room. The benches were polished smooth by decades of nervous hands. The ceiling lights hummed softly, casting a flat, unforgiving brightness over everyone seated beneath them. I noticed details I had never paid attention to before. The way people folded their hands. The way no one breathed too deeply. The way silence itself seemed regulated. Nathan sat at the defense table in a dark suit I had helped him choose years earlier. I remembered standing with him in front of a mirror, smoothing the fabric on his shoulder, telling him the color made him look trustworthy. It still did. He looked calm. Concerned. Almost tender. When our eyes met, he gave me a look I knew well. I had seen it in kitchens, bedrooms, doctors' offices. Concern. Disappointment. A quiet warning not to embarrass him. My mother sat behind him, close enough to reach out if she wanted to. She clutched a folded tissue, dabbing at the corners of her eyes as if she were already mourning something. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead, rigid, like someone afraid that turning her head would force her to see something she could not unsee. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The scrape of chairs against the floor sounded like a single, collective intake of breath. Nathan's lawyer spoke first. He spoke smoothly, confidently, as if the outcome were already decided. He painted a careful picture, a devoted husband, a fragile wife, a man who had acted out of love and fear. She has a documented medical condition, he said. Episodes of confusion. Instability. My client acted out of concern, nothing more. He spoke about protection. About responsibility. About sacrifice. Nathan lowered his head slightly, hands clasped, his shoulders slumping just enough to look burdened. Then Nathan himself stood. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man careful not to startle anyone. I love her, he said, his voice trembling in just the right places. Everything I did because I was afraid of losing her. I thought I was helping. Behind him, my mother let out a soft, broken sob. For a moment, I understood why people believed him. Then my lawyer stood. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't perform. She placed a stack of documents on the table, one by one. Each soft thud echoed louder than it should have. Medical reports, she said calmly. Doctor testimonies. Call recordings. Messages. Nathan straightened. The judge leaned forward slightly. A screen lit up. The first file appeared, heart monitor data, clean and clinical, time-stamped over months. Notice, my lawyer said, how the episodes coincide precisely with prolonged use of a device that was never prescribed by any cardiologist. The bracelet. A murmur rippled through the room. Nathan's lawyer objected. The judge overruled him without hesitation. Next came audio. Phone calls between Nathan and my employer. The room went still as Nathan's voice filled the space, clear, confident, unmistakable. She's not stable, the recording said. You should be prepared. She's been confused lately. Emotional. My employer's voice followed, hesitant. Are you sure? I live with her, Nathan replied. Trust me. I watched my mother's hand freeze midair. The tissue trembled between her fingers. Then came messages. Screenshots enlarged for everyone to see. Dates. Patterns. Escalation. You wouldn't manage without me. You forget things. You get overwhelmed. Let me handle it. Months of quiet erosion laid bare. Finally, my lawyer played the last recording. Nathan's voice again. This time private. Unfiltered. Without me, he said, you're nothing. The words hung in the air, heavier than silence. No one moved. The judge removed his glasses slowly and looked directly at Nathan. That, he said, his voice measured and cold, is not love. Nathan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. That, the judge continued, is abuse. Something inside me loosened. Not relief, release. Behind Nathan, my mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Raw. Uncontrolled. She looked at me then. Really looked. Her face collapsed. I'm sorry, she whispered, not loud enough to interrupt, but loud enough to reach me. We believed him. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The competency request denied. The power of attorney voided. A restraining order issued. Nathan did not look at me as he gathered his things. He looked smaller now. Reduced. Stripped of the calm authority he had worn for so long. When the courtroom emptied, I remained seated for a moment, hands folded in my lap, listening to my own breathing. For the first time in years, no one was defining me. And I knew, quietly, certainly, that his control over my life was over. After the courtroom emptied, the quiet felt unnatural. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, the kind of silence that arrives after something has been torn out by the roots. People moved past me in the aisle, coats brushing, shoes tapping against the floor, their lives continuing as if nothing sacred had been exposed. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, breathing slowly, making sure my body was still mine. My lawyer touched my shoulder lightly and said something practical. Next steps, documents, follow-up dates. I nodded. I thanked her. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, as if it belonged to a woman who had already stepped out of a long, dim room into harsh daylight. Outside, the air felt sharper. Cooler. The courthouse steps were wide and bright, and I walked down them carefully, aware of the tremor in my legs, not from weakness, but from release. My mother stood a few feet away, alone now. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders were hunched, her coat buttoned wrong, her face stripped of certainty. For the first time, she did not look like someone who knew what was best. She moved toward me slowly, as if she didn't trust her own right to cross the distance. I didn't understand, she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. He explained everything so well. He made it sound reasonable. I looked at her. Really looked. At the lines around her mouth. At the tiredness she hid behind discipline and belief in authority. I know, I said. That was all. She reached for me, hesitated, then let her hand fall back to her side. She cried then, not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly, the way people cry when they realize they have been wrong too long to undo it. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't refusal. It was simply acknowledgement, of the damage, of the years, of the way love can be used as a leash without anyone calling it that. Behind us, my coworkers passed by in pairs and small groups. Some avoided my eyes entirely. Some offered tight, uneasy smiles, as if looking at me too directly might make them responsible for what they had allowed. No one said the words I needed to hear. And I understood why. It's easier to believe a story than to admit you helped silence someone. In the days that followed, the noise around Nathan faded. He stopped calling. The messages ceased. His absence was sudden and complete, like a door slammed shut. At first, the quiet startled me. I would wake in the night expecting to hear him shifting beside me, expecting the familiar tension of waiting for approval or correction. Instead, there was nothing. Just my own breathing. Just the small settling sounds of a house that no longer had to hold its breath. I moved out within a week. Not dramatically. Not in secret. I packed my clothes, my books, the documents I kept tucked away, the things that were unquestionably mine. I left behind objects that had absorbed too much of him, furniture chosen together, rooms that had heard too many careful conversations where I learned to speak less and less. The new place was smaller. Quiet. Sunlight reached the kitchen in the mornings. The pipes clicked at night. The refrigerator hummed steadily like a simple promise. I bought a mug the first day. Nothing special. But it was mine, chosen without anyone's approval. At work, the atmosphere changed in a way I hadn't expected. People were cautious around me at first. Some acted overly kind, as if kindness could erase what they had participated in. Others kept distance, as if the truth might be contagious. My manager called me into his office. He didn't say the word sorry immediately. He circled it. He spoke about misunderstanding, concern, procedure. Then finally, he looked down at his desk and said, quietly, "We should have listened to you." I didn't respond right away. Because what I wanted to say was, you listened to him because he was calm. But I only nodded once, slowly, and said, "I'm listening now." To myself. That night, in my new apartment, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my wrist. The bracelet was gone. The skin felt strangely bare, as if my body were still expecting the cool pressure there. I caught myself reaching for it out of habit, my fingers searching for something that wasn't there. And for the first time, I understood how deep his control had gone. Not into my schedule. Into my reflexes. I closed my hand into a fist and let it rest on my thigh, steadying myself. I wasn't free in a single day. But I was no longer trapped in a lie. And that was enough to keep breathing. The first weeks alone felt unreal, like living inside a borrowed life. I woke up each morning expecting resistance, my body bracing for correction, for reminders, for that familiar low tension that had once framed every decision. Instead, there was only quiet. Not comforting at first. Exposed. I learned the sounds of my new apartment slowly. The click of the radiator. The soft groan of the floor near the window. The way the light moved across the wall in the late afternoon. No one commented on my routines. No one adjusted them. I began therapy 2 weeks later. I chose the therapist myself. A small but important act. She didn't rush to label anything. She listened. She let silence do its work. When I described Nathan's concern, his care, his constant presence, she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Control doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it whispers until your own voice disappears." We worked carefully. Not toward anger, not toward blame, but toward clarity. Toward learning how my fear had been redirected. How my independence had been reframed as danger. How love had been turned into supervision. At work, the changes surprised me. I spoke more. Not louder, clearer. I stopped apologizing before sentences. I noticed how often I had once deferred without realizing it. A month later, I was promoted. Not because of sympathy. Not because of the trial. But because I finally occupied the space I had always earned. When my manager told me, there was no celebration. Just recognition. That felt better. I began rebuilding my life in small, deliberate ways. I walked without tracking my steps. I drank coffee without checking my pulse. I let my phone rest in another room. I learned the difference between being alone and being monitored. The bracelet stayed in a drawer. Sometimes I took it out and held it, not with fear, but with curiosity. How something so small had rewritten my sense of self. Then I put it back. Closed the drawer. Chose my wrist again. My mother called occasionally. Carefully. We spoke about ordinary things. Weather. Food. Distance. She did not offer advice. I did not offer absolution. What grew between us was something slower and more honest. One evening, months later, I stood in my kitchen washing a single mug and realized I was humming. The sound startled me. It had been a long time since my body did anything unprompted. I dried my hands and stood still, listening to the hum fade. Nothing followed it. No correction. No warning. No concern. Just quiet. I understood then that the reward was not freedom as people imagine it, not escape, not triumph, not reinvention. The reward was authorship. Choosing when to rest. Choosing when to speak. Choosing how much space my life required. I did not become fearless. I became self-directed. And for the first time, that was enough. What this taught me is simple, though it took nearly losing myself to understand it. Care does not hurt. Love does not shrink you. And concern that erases your voice is not concern at all. Control rarely announces itself. It arrives politely. It uses calm tones and reasonable explanations. It convinces others before it convinces you. And by the time you realize what's happening, you are already explaining yourself for existing. Sometimes the greatest danger is not a stranger, but the person who insists they know what's best for you. This story is shared not for drama, but for clarity. Names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. What remains is the truth of the experience. If you recognized something familiar in this story, pause and listen to that recognition. It exists for a reason.